We believe history began 5,000 years ago. Sumer, Egypt, Indus Valley, stone tablets, monuments, myths. But what if that's just the surface? What if civilization didn't begin there, but restarted there? What if everything we call ancient was already a reconstruction of something far older, something that came before the flood, before writing, before linear time? Across continents and cultures, there are whispers of forgotten worlds, not metaphorical, but technological, not primitive, but precise. Atlantis, Lemuria, Mu. Names dismissed as fantasy, but spoken across oceans, by people who never met. They tell of lands that fell, of knowledge lost, of humans who once lived differently, not above nature, but within it. They speak of crystal technologies, telepathic societies, cities powered by resonance, structures aligned with stars, wisdom encoded in stone, not to decorate, but to vibrate. And perhaps most haunting, they speak of a fall, not a meteor, not a war, a fall in consciousness, a forgetting. And in that forgetting, we became modern. The question now is not whether these civilizations existed, but whether they still do. Not out there, but in here. Because the ruins are not just buried in sand, they're buried in memory, and we've been dreaming of them ever since. Atlantis, a word that triggers images. A sunken city, towers of quartz, temples lost beneath the sea. To most, it's a myth. First told by Plato in his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, a tale of a great civilization, advanced beyond its time, that fell in a single day and night. But what if Plato wasn't inventing? What if he was preserving? He claimed the story came from Solon, who heard it from Egyptian priests, who claimed it was already ancient when they told it. A war between Atlantis and the known world, a civilization too powerful, too proud, destroyed not by enemy hands, but by imbalance. And what did they lose? Plato spoke of technology powered by energy fields, of geometrically perfect architecture, of social harmony held by mental discipline, of crystalline networks used not for storage, but transmission. The deeper you look, the more Atlantis stops sounding like fantasy and starts sounding like a memory, because similar stories echo everywhere. The Hopi speak of the third world, destroyed by corruption. The Tamil Sangam texts speak of Kumari Kandam, a sunken land that once connected continents. The Dogon remember a star system they shouldn't know. These aren't isolated myths. They're fragments of something shared, something that existed before the fracture, before we lost coherence. Modern genetics reveals unusual anomalies, unknown haplogroups, shared motifs in distant tribal carvings, maps of constellations carved thousands of years before telescopes. It's not just stories, it's pattern. Atlantis may never be found underwater, because maybe it never sank in the ocean. Maybe it sank in the mind, a collapse of collective memory, a rupture in timeline, a civilization that fell, not because of external war, but internal forgetting. And if that's true, then remembering isn't about archaeology, it's about resonance. If this part stirred something deep, comment, I remember. Because remembrance may not be recalling the past, but restoring your original pattern. If Atlantis was the civilization of mind and geometry, Lemuria was the civilization of heart and harmony. Rarely mentioned in Western texts, but echoed in Polynesian, Tamil, Tibetan, and native traditions. Lemuria, or Mu, was said to be a vast landmass that once connected continents. But its true identity was never about land. It was about coherence. The Lemurians were said to be deeply intuitive, not telepathic in a sci-fi sense, but resonantly connected. They didn't speak in language, they communicated in emotion. Shared thought, felt each other's truths. They didn't build pyramids, they became them. Their structures were grown, not assembled, aligned with Earth's grid lines, what modern science now calls the Schumann resonance or telluric current. They knew that consciousness could be embedded in sound, that intention could program water, that form followed vibration. And they didn't mind the earth, they sang to it. Many traditions say they lived in a state we might now call 5D, not in the literal sense, but as a dimension of frequency, not form, a place where fear was not the governing emotion, where hierarchy had no function, where the body was not dense, but luminous. But the fall came, not in fire, in forgetting. When the collective frequency dropped, matter became dense. Individuality overtook unity. Sound lost its shape, and Lemuria faded, not like a city destroyed, but like a song, no longer heard. The question isn't where is Lemuria? It's, are you still tuned to its frequency? Because if you've ever felt that silence has shape, that your body remembers music it's never heard, that you belong to something before the world became noise, you might not be discovering Lemuria. You might be returning to it. If this part whispered to something ancient in you, comment, I feel the echo. Because sometimes remembrance doesn't come with facts, but with vibration. If Atlantis and Lemuria truly existed, where are the ruins? Where are the cities, the tools, the texts? How can something so vast simply vanish? Modern science demands evidence: stone, metal, bones, data. But what if these civilizations weren't built for survival, but for resonance? What if they left no trace because trace wasn't the point? Here's what we know. Organic material decays, shorelines shift, tectonic plates consume. Entire islands can disappear in a century, let alone a dozen millennia. But even more than erosion, maybe we've been looking in the wrong place. Because these civilizations may not have used metal. They use crystal, sound, consciousness. And these don't fossilize. They fade or transform. Ancient traditions across the globe speak of living temples, structures that responded to voice. They speak of cities that dematerialized, people who ascended rather than died. And they didn't write books. They encoded knowledge in sound, geometry, myth. If you expect memory to look like stone, you'll miss the vibration under your skin, because the real record may not be buried in sand, but in DNA, in mitochondrial whispers, in dream symbols, in instincts that don't match your environment. You call it intuition. Deja vu, an unexplained draw to ancient symbols, to lost languages, to sacred geometry. But maybe it's memory, surface memory, cellular memory, soul memory. Because what if these civilizations didn't leave things behind? They left you. If this part lit something quiet but certain, comment, I carry the record. Because sometimes the forgotten wisdom didn't disappear, it just became you. Modern buildings are made for function. Ancient structures were made for frequency. They weren't just shelters, they were resonators. In both Atlantean and Lemurian traditions, spoken or remembered, sound was not just vibration, it was instruction. Certain tones were used to heal, others to lift stone, still others to align the human body with Earth's field. This wasn't mysticism, it was physics, of a kind we've forgotten. The ancients didn't use blueprints, they used ratios. Golden mean, phi spiral, Fibonacci sequence, not as design flourishes, but because they understood something we've lost. Geometry isn't aesthetic, it's energetic. A structure aligned to these ratios doesn't just look good, it resonates with life. It stabilizes field, it clears thought. Temples were tuned, stones were cut with vibrational precision, and the human voice was the primary instrument. In Lemuria, it's said that stone responded to chant. In Atlantis, crystalline grids stored consciousness, not digitally but harmonically. They didn't write code, they sang it. Even today you see echoes. Tibetan bowls, Gregorian chant, Hindu ragas, chakra toning, mantras. Why do these survive across time? Because frequency bypasses logic. It speaks directly to structure. It doesn't convince, it restores. Modern science is just beginning to rediscover this. Somatics shows sound creating geometry in water. Binaural beats alter brain states. Certain frequencies repair DNA strands in vitro. So what if the ancients didn't leave behind books? Because their libraries were tonal. What if knowledge wasn't meant to be read, but remembered through sound? If this part rang true for you, comment, I tune to memory. Because maybe you don't need more information. Maybe you just need to vibrate the one you already carry. Every myth of a golden age ends the same way, a fall. Not just Atlantis or Lemuria, but Eden, Avalon, the Tower of Babel, a collapse, a separation, a forgetting. But what caused it? The stories differ. Too much pride, forbidden knowledge, disobedience, war. But beneath the symbols, a common pattern emerges. The fall was not external, it was vibrational. Consciousness lost coherence. In Atlantis, they say it was the overuse of power, crystalline energy exploited, technology outpaced ethics, the mind expanded, but the heart fractured. In Lemuria, the story is quieter. Not destruction, dissonance. The field destabilized. Unity dissolved into individuality. The collective became fragmented. In both cases, humanity dropped in frequency. And with that drop came separation from Earth, from each other, from Source. Telepathy faded. Intuition dulled. The body densified. The spirit forgot how to speak through it. We began to see ourselves as separate, as isolated beings in a hostile world. And that separation gave rise to fear. Fear birthed hierarchy. Hierarchy birthed control. Control birthed conflict. Civilization, as we now know it, was built on the ruins of resonance. And yet, traces remain, not just in myth, but in the ache, that quiet longing for something we can't name, a sense that life was meant to be different, lighter, truer. The fall wasn't the end, it was a sleep. And now, we're beginning to stir. If this part touched that deep remembering, comment. I feel the return. Because the fall wasn't forever, it was a cycle. And maybe, just maybe, we're nearing the other side. We call it New Age. But what if it's ancient recall? The ideas spreading today about vibration, field, consciousness, alignment are not inventions. They are remembrances. Quantum physics speaks of entanglement, two particles connected across space and time. The ancients called it unity, no separation between observer and observed. Everything connected by field, by intent. Modern energy healing uses hands, frequency, thought. The ancients did the same, but they didn't call it Reiki or sound therapy. They called it alignment. Today, we speak of heart coherence, brainwave states, mind-body connection. They didn't need those terms. They lived them. They didn't meditate to escape. They existed in meditation. Their breath wasn't a technique. It was the interface. Even sacred geometry, so often relegated to decor, was a language, one that spoke directly to structure, to matter, to water, to DNA. Symbols weren't metaphors. They were instructions. A spiral wasn't just art. It was memory. A mandala wasn't decoration. It was a map of coherence. And now, those same shapes resurface in crop circles, in brain scans, in somatic fields. The deeper we dive into modern consciousness studies, the more we find echoes of what we once knew. That reality responds to feeling. That thought is form. That time is not linear. That we are not from here. We are here now. Because nothing truly new is being discovered. We are simply decoding the wisdom that was encoded before history began. If this part hit like a sudden knowing, comment. I recognize the code. Because maybe the awakening isn't invention. Maybe it's return. Why were the ancients so obsessed with the stars? They built monuments aligned to solstices, equinoxes, planetary movements. They carved maps of constellations into stone. They told stories of sky beings, star ancestors, and celestial teachers. But why? Because to them, the sky wasn't a mystery. It was memory. The Lemurians believed they came from the Pleiades. Atlantean records speak of Sirius, of beings of light who seeded consciousness here. The Dogon tribe knew of Sirius B, an invisible star not seen by modern telescopes until 1970. Yet they described its orbit, its density, its movement, centuries earlier. The Maya tracked Venus with impossible precision. The Egyptians aligned the pyramids to Orion's belt. Tibetan legends speak of Shambhala descending from the sky. This isn't coincidence, it's continuity. These civilizations may have looked up at the stars, not with wonder, but with recognition, because maybe Earth wasn't just a home. It was a station, a school, a temple planet, a place where different streams of consciousness were seeded, experimented, and evolved. Not aliens as in Hollywood, but intelligence, light, pattern. And maybe these ancient people remembered what we forgot, that the stars weren't far, they were origin. That we didn't arrive from monkeys, we descended from mind, from light, from lineage older than the earth itself. And the further we got from that memory, the more alone we felt. But it never left. It lives in your bones, your gaze, your dreams of flying, your longing for elsewhere. Because you are not only of earth, you are of stars, made solid for a while. If this part called to something wordless in you, comment, I remember the sky. Because maybe looking up is the same as looking in. Civilizations rise and fall. But what if this fall wasn't natural? What if forgetting was engineered? All over the world, ancient texts speak of a veil, a time when the world darkened, when memory collapsed, when gods withdrew. In the Vedic cycle, it's called Kali Yuga, the age of darkness and separation. In Hermetic texts, the fall of man. In Gnostic Gospels, the archons. In biblical myth, Babel and exile. What they all describe is a turning point, a descent, from coherence into confusion, from inner knowing into outer authority, from spirit-led civilization to control-based structure. But who or what triggered this? Some speak of cataclysm, others of planetary shift. Some whisper of manipulation, not by humans, but by energies that feed on distortion. Not monsters, not demons, frequencies, patterns that disrupt coherence, fields that interfere with memory, architectures that suppress intuition. And what did they replace it with? Linear time, separation of spirit and body, disconnection from earth, fear-based hierarchy, mind over matter. They didn't erase the old knowledge, they buried it, under dogma, distraction, noise. They made us forget how powerful we were, that you could heal with your voice, align with the stars, transcend space and time, feel truth in the body, not just debate it in the mind. This was not an accident, it was strategy, because a human who remembers cannot be ruled. And yet, memory leaks through cracks, in dreams, in symbols, in longing, and now in you. If this part ignited that fire in your chest, comment, I break the spell. Because maybe forgetting was part of the design, but remembering is your move. Why now? Why, after centuries of silence, are millions of people suddenly drawn to symbols, stars, breathwork, crystals, sacred geometry, the names Atlantis and Lemuria? Why are we remembering myths we never studied, feeling truths we were never taught? This is not a trend, it's a return engineered from within, because consciousness moves in cycles, not lines. And the arc that bent toward forgetting is now bending back toward remembering. Look around. More people feel drawn to meditation than war, to coherence over consumption, to breath over broadcast, to stillness over stimulation. They can't explain it, but they feel it. A call, a pull, a knowing. It's not curiosity, it's resonance. And here's the deeper layer. What if those who fell are those who return? What if the ones waking up now are fragments of the same consciousness that once sang to the earth, that once moved stone with thought, that once forgot who they were? What if you are a returner? You who feel like an old soul in a world of noise. You who carry grief you can't trace, longing you can't name, visions that don't belong to this century. You are not confused. You are remembering. And memory always comes back when the field is ready. We are entering a window now of clarity, of choice, of realignment, and those who remember will hold the blueprint for what comes next. If this part struck something deeper than thought, comment. I return with memory, because the ones who rise now are the same ones who once built and once fell. Memory is only powerful if it becomes blueprint. We've remembered Lemuria. We've remembered Atlantis. But what now? What do we build with ancient knowing in a modern world? The answer is not temples, not cities. It's frequency. We build coherence, not systems of control, but fields of resonance. A civilization doesn't start with policy. It starts with state, with how people feel, and what they amplify together. The Atlanteans knew how to shape matter with thought, but they lost balance. Power outpaced wisdom. The Lemurians knew how to live in unity, but they didn't anchor it in density. When the frequency dropped, they vanished. We're not meant to repeat. We're meant to combine, to merge Atlantis and Lemuria, mind and heart, precision and presence, structure and soul. This generation, this moment, isn't about going back. It's about becoming the bridge. We carry memory not to relive it, but to apply it. That's why we crave sacred space, but build it in our breath. That's why we study stars, but find guidance in the body. That's why we seek ancient names, but speak truth in modern tongues. We are remembering to build again, but this time, not with stone, with frequency, with integrity. with remembrance fully integrated, because the new world isn't a place, it's a resonance. If this part activated that architect in you, comment, I build from memory, because remembering is step one. But building, that's why you return. You've heard the names: Atlantis, Lemuria, Mu, Golden Ages, Lost Cities, Star Wisdom, Crystal Temples. But what if they were never places? What if they were frequencies, states of consciousness we once lived in and lost? Not because of a flood, not because of war, because we forgot how to hold coherence. We collapsed inward, fell into fear, broke our own fields, and the world outside simply responded. And yet, here you are, remembering, reaching, resonating, not with history, with yourself. Because those civilizations weren't other. They were us. Before the noise, before the fracture, they still exist. Not in ruins, but in you. In your urge to realign, in your draw to sacred design, in your refusal to live in dissonance, in your knowing that something much deeper is calling you back. You don't need to prove they were real. You just need to feel that you were there. You don't need to rebuild their temples. You need to become what they once held. Because in the end, Atlantis and Lemuria aren't gone. They're encoded. In geometry, in song, in breath, in you. And when you remember fully, not with your mind, but your field, they rise again, not as cities, as states of being. If you've walked this entire journey, comment, I carry the ancient within. Because the ones who remember don't just retell the story, they become the next chapter.